with 700 wives, you've got a lot of problems. I mean, because you'd have babies born, to the minute, determining who's next in line for the throne.
So, Nala, so you're dyslexic and you believe in dog? Is that right?
Dog.
And this is a quote from Rosalind Franklin, co-discoverer of the DNA double helix. I agree that faith is essential to success in life, but I do not accept your definition of faith, i.e. belief in life after death. In my view, all that is necessary for faith is the belief that by doing our best, we shall come nearer to success, and that success in our aims, the improvement of the lot of mankind present and future, is worth attaining. I maintain that faith in this world is perfectly possible without faith in another world.
And it's a problem, and maybe the main point for your listeners is there are words that we have to decide if we're going to use or not. Are we going to try to co-opt the word faith and give it a secular meaning? And people do this with words like spiritual and meditation and prayer. Are we going to reject that word, or are we going to try to redefine that word? I don't have a problem with faith. All of us have people in our lives that we have faith in because it's based on evidence, right? Like if I've had 25 interactions with a loved one and they behave consistently when given certain stimuli, then I can have faith that they'll behave that way the next time. That doesn't involve any supernatural. It involves evidence. And I think that the pull quote that you brought from that scientist is basically making the argument that we are capable of more than we think we are. We're capable of great things. The human mind is capable. Human cooperation is capable. When we cooperate and communicate and strive, we can accomplish great things. Do I have faith in that? Absolutely. Whether we're talking scientific or political or any other aspect of our life in a community, there are things that we can have faith in. I don't have a problem with that word, but I know that most religious people use the word faith in faith in something supernatural, faith in something beyond the natural world. I don't have to use the word that way.
One of the complaints I have about one of many complaints I have about apologetics is this willingness or tendency to misuse words. I hear this common refrain that drives me nuts. Everybody's got faith in something. You know what? Stop. Right? On currency, you've got the full faith and credit of the United States. That means one thing in that context, but I have faith that the sun is going to rise in the morning because I know how orbital dynamics work, right? I have faith that you're going to do a relatively good job editing this and making us sound good because I've seen your work 1,000 times. To Rex's point, we have evidence of that.
Good point. The New Testament gives a definition of faith that is belief in things without evidence. And
right.
For that definition of faith, I completely reject it. But
yeah, faith is the evidence of last resort. I have faith, therefore my belief.
It could be argued that the single most beneficial and profound verse in the Bible is Matthew 7:12. Whatever you desire for men to do to you, you shall also do to them, for this is the law and the prophets. Yahweh did a good job with this, Jim, but it seems do unto others rule is a biblical copy and paste from older religions. Confucianism, do not impose on others what you do not desire others to impose upon you. Hinduism, let no man do to another that which would be repugnant to himself. Zoroastrianism, human nature is good only when it does not do unto another whatever is not good for its own self. And Buddhism, hurt not others in ways you would find hurtful. And Greek philosophy or Greek religion, if I choose, I may rule over you, but what I condemn in another, I will, if I may, avoid myself. I've always been a loophole finder. And even as my earliest memories of the Golden Rule, my initial reaction was, yeah, but what if you are somebody who just really likes to fight? if you do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and you enjoy random mixed martial arts combat, you would fight other people frequently. Perhaps you live in a society where this is valued, where perhaps there is a very Darwinian cutthroat society where the strong are valued, the weak are not valued, and we do engage in this constant competition to better our society through violence. This could exist as a valid type of society, but it is not our values of our society. However, it would seem to be perfectly consistent with the biblical golden rule, which leads me to an interesting conclusion. The biblical golden rule is, in fact, an argument for moral relativism. The argument or the rule is based on a desire that the people in a society behave in a fairly consistent and regulated way within that society. Therefore, if you have a society that does not comport to our values, 20th century Western values, you can still obey the golden rule, but have morals that are very different from what we have. This has been explored in a number of science fiction items. It's also fairly obvious when you look at what is considered moral and immoral in other societies, that a certain degree of corruption is allowed and even normal, and not considered immoral in other societies where it would be in ours. So it's very odd that a religion which claims a universal morality, an objective, definitive, divine morality, would use society as the basis for its morals and judging morals.
Haram is separated into 5 decision categories. Those that are mandatory, those that are recommended, neutral or permissible, reprehensible, and forbidden. There are examples of each that include specific actions, such as adultery, sex between single male and female, sex between a single person and a married person, adultery. Look at women with lustful thoughts. I guess it's written all over your face. No pork meat, monkey, dog, or cat meat unless you are starving. Also, there are specific instructions on how to slaughter animals and prepare the meat for Islam consumption. How and what to wear for your clothing, especially for women. Inheritance, business ethics, divorce, marriage and family, and last but not least, intoxicants. And that can even include vanilla flavoring. So it's very specific. If you go back and think about the 10 Commandments and how this stacks up against Islam, again, as a Christian that's in deconversion to atheism, I can tell you that in the Christian faith, if you sin, you confess it to God, and in faith, He forgives you. If you murder somebody, obviously our state and federal rules come into play there. But you can still ask God to forgive you, and He will forgive you. But when you get to the holy gates and you come face to face with God, it is known that a murder is no different than stealing or adultery. A sin is a sin is a sin. So while you may reap the consequences here on earth, for example, going to prison, you're also going to reap those consequences when you get to heaven. In Islam, they definitely have a more strict view of how to deal with the outliers of their faith, those that break the rules, the laws, because they will kill you.
Solomon, the wisest man in the Bible, had 700 wives and 300 girlfriends. Now, King Solomon loved many foreign women, along with the daughter of Pharaoh. Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women, from the nations concerning which Yahweh had said to the people of Israel, "You shall not enter into marriage with them, neither shall they with you, for surely they will turn away your heart after their gods." Solomon clung to these in love. He had 700 wives, who were princesses, and 300 concubines. And his wives turned away his heart. For when Solomon was old, his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not wholly true to Yahweh his God, as was the heart of David his father. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. So Solomon did what was evil in the sight of Yahweh, and did not wholly follow Yahweh, as David his father had done. Then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, and for Molech, the abomination of the Ammonites, on the mountain east of Jerusalem. And so he did for all his foreign wives who made offerings and sacrifice to their gods. All right, so there's a lot here going on. When we get to this passage, we've just gone through all this stuff about how amazing Solomon is and how he's done this most impressive thing. He's built this beautiful temple to Yahweh, and all these people think that he's just the greatest, and the Queen of Sheba comes to kiss his ass, basically, and tell him how great he is, and maybe he had a little thing going on with her too, in addition to the Pharaoh's daughter, which, let's remember, it's because the Israelites spent so much time in Egypt, it's actually acceptable to have relations with Egyptians, because after, I think it's 3 generations, the progeny will then be full-blooded Israelites, but not from these other, actually Edomites as well. So why are Edomites called out here as a problem? But at any rate, it's not that the people are bad. Like, there's nothing inherently wrong necessarily about Edomites or Ammonites or Moabites. Well, in fact, Ruth is a Moabite, right? So Ruth, who exists in the lineage of Jesus, is a Moabite, right? So why is it a problem that these people might mix with the Israelites? Because ethnically they're all pretty much the same thing anyway. They're all generally Mesopotamian, generally Semitic. They're all basically the same. They're all in the same population genetic pool. But the problem is they worship other gods. They worship Chemosh and not Yahweh. They worship Milcom and not Yahweh. They worship Ashtoreth and not Yahweh. That's the problem, right? It's about it's like, well, you can't hang out with anybody who's not a Yankees fan because I'm the owner of the Yankees. And if you're hanging out with somebody who's a Mets fan, that's not okay. If you're hanging out with somebody who's a Cincinnati Reds fan, that's definitely not okay. You can't, you have to sort of be within this very tight group identity. And if you go outside of that, then your wife is going to want to, just imagine, just going back to the baseball analogy, right? So if you are the Yankees owner and you're trying to encourage everybody in your family to love the Yankees with all their heart and all their soul, but your son marries someone who's a White Sox fan, right? Well, if his wife is a true White Sox fan, and as much as a fan of the White Sox as you are, and they say, well, look, we'll compromise, okay? We will, half the games that we go to during the season will be Yankees games, and the other half will be White Sox games. That seems like a pretty decent compromise, especially for a marriage, right? If you've got 2 baseball fans and this person is really into one team and this person is really into the other team, you split it up. You say, okay, well, half the games will go here and half the games will go there. But if you're looking at that from the position of the Yankees owner, whose son that is, and you're like, well, wait a minute, I want you to go to all the Yankees games. So now you're married to a White Sox fan, which means that half the games that I want you to go to, you're not going to. And that's less respect being paid to me, right? And so that is just, it's ridiculous to expect that level of devotion to something as trivial as a baseball team. Apologies to the baseball fans out there. But it's the same basic idea, right? So why does Yahweh care? Oh, it's because having somebody in your life in that closer relationship, and with Solomon, 700 wives, 300 concubines, and a concubine is basically like a second tier wife, like an unofficial wife, like an official unofficial, like a, I don't know, like an official side piece, maybe? I don't know exactly what you would call that. A mistress, that's another sort of archaic term to describe that. But someone with whom you have somewhat of a sexual relationship, not necessarily an emotional relationship, and any children you would have with a concubine wouldn't necessarily be an heir. Although with 700 wives, you've got a lot of problems. I mean, because you'd have babies born, to the minute, determining who's next in line for the throne. That's a whole complicated thing in and of itself. And of course, none of this is actually true. If there was a historical Solomon, his kingdom was nothing like it is described. The idea of him having literally 1,000 women at his disposal, 700 wives, 300 concubines, 1,000 women. That's just to boost his story up and make him seem even more important and fancy and just amazing, right? So everything about Solomon is supposed to be amazing, right? So, well, of course he would have had the most wives that anybody in the history of anywhere would have had. So none of this is actually historical. This is just sort of bolstering his reputation. But the point is that he went after all these other gods, and so that took his focus away from Yahweh. And this is consistent with the Deuteronomic theology that we see throughout this section of the Old Testament, the idea that Yahweh is very jealous, and if you spend any time at all or give any sort of respect or deference to any other god aside from Yahweh, that there is nothing worse that you can do, right? So even if Solomon wasn't actually worshiping these other gods, the fact that he was allowing his wives to have these, sort of cult centers or little mini altars or whatever they were being built in Jerusalem, in the holy city of Yahweh, the fact that he was allowing this meant that necessarily his attention was being not given 100% to Yahweh, because at any minute or any hour that he would spend with any of these other wives that were interested in going to worship Ashtoreth, which was actually probably also worshipped at the same time as Yahweh's consort. So that's a whole separate thing. The history of the Hebrews is not as monotheistic as is sort of insisted upon in the Old Testament. They were very much polytheistic for actually more of their history than they were monotheistic. Even if you take into account what's reported in the Old Testament, there's a lot more polytheism that goes on there that you just don't really pay attention to, because the authors want to play it down. The authors don't want to focus on that. The authors want to, if there's somebody who does something that goes away from Yahweh, they want to sort of heap burning coals on them and criticize them. But otherwise, they're just going to ignore the people that did not give deference to Yahweh, and they want to celebrate the heroes who did insist on worshiping Yahweh only, like Elijah, like David, etc. So that's what this is. It's the 1,000 women thing. That's totally exaggeration, and the whole kingdom of Solomon, the whole the rule of Solomon, this quote unquote golden age, is a total historical fabrication. Anyway, none of that. We have no evidence of that any of that happened the way that it was. the most impactful king from ancient Israel that we know of is actually King Omri, who is the father of King Ahab, and both of them were considered to be evil kings because they didn't worship Yahweh exclusively, and Ahab is called out because he did marry a foreign wife, but only apparently one, Jezebel, right? It doesn't say if there are other wives, but Jezebel is the one. She was from the Philistines, and so she worshipped other gods besides Yahweh, and she hated Yahweh's priests, and so that's why she's evil, and that's why Ahab is evil, because he married this awful Philistine woman. Solomon married 1,000 women from all over. Like, what were there not any Hebrew women that he could marry? What is this like? Because it's this sort of thing where you want to present this idea of Solomon as having, all this glory and honor, right? So the idea that all these women from all these other countries want to be married to him, that boosts his honor up. But then at the same time, what are the implications of that? Well, if he does have all these women and concubines from other countries, then that's going to introduce other gods, and so that's a bad thing. So you kind of can't have it both ways, and that's why the sort of the ending of Solomon's story is very kind of unsatisfying, because you can't really take anything away from this, because you're like, well, wait a minute. You can have all this great wisdom and glory and then be brought down because you married the wrong person. If God's in charge of that, that's very disappointing.